Hello, everyone. I'm Krzysztof Piekarski.
And I'm Dale Wright.
And I'm Malek Moazzam-Doulat, and welcome to Fire Philosophy, a podcast about how to live a meaningful life in the wake of the death of God and between the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche and Zen Buddhism. Dale Wright, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, as I just explained to my colleagues here, my voice is thin. I spent the morning with coaching a team of blind baseball players. It's called Beep Baseball. And being blind, it's all verbal, right? It's all audio. There's no visual. And so I'm screaming all morning, and I've only got that much voice left. So I'm going first. So who am I? I'm a California native. I've lived in a number of other places: Pacific Northwest, Midwest, Virginia. Spent a year in Sweden, 2.5 years in Japan. Lots of travel, but California is my home, where I've been for quite a long time, having taught at Occidental College in Los Angeles. Courses in religious studies and Asian studies and philosophy. I've always had philosophical inclinations going back into my childhood, but when it became time to go off to graduate school, I really couldn't do it in philosophy. Philosophy departments were set up in a way that didn't work for me. Two things were wrong. One, my interests in philosophy were entirely existential, meaning basically I want to think clearly about what it means to be a human being, what it means to live a life. Questions of logic and questions of theory of knowledge, are more peripheral to me. So, and that's what philosophy departments were focused on. Secondly, no one in philosophy departments taught courses in Chinese philosophy or Indian, Asian, Buddhist philosophy. That philosophers weren't yet ready in that epoch to admit that other cultures had philosophical traditions. But I wanted both. I wanted a good mix. And the place to find that in those days, and still to some extent is departments of religious studies. So I went off to study religion. But my upbringing was entirely secular. And my family we just weren't religious. And I knew almost nothing about it. So I can remember the occasion when I explained to my parents what my chosen career was going to be. I was going to go off to study religion. After a jaw-dropping period of about a minute's total silence, they both said in unison, well, why? Why would you do that? This is the 20th century, Dale. And it was the 20th century then, meaning, religion is sort of an archaic thing. Don't you want to be a contemporary person? Like, be a lawyer, be something. But it was clear to me that this is what I wanted. And so in trying to explain to them a variety of approaches, but I talked about living normal but good lives. And then I talked about there are some individuals who are just extraordinary, right? They're just extraordinary. And in the sense of the vision they have of the world, they seem wide awake. They live lives experimentally. And I said, I want to meet these people. I want to read about them. Even if I can't be one, I want to move towards them. That was my life's goal. So as a young romantic, I went off and did that. In graduate school and beyond, as a young professor, I was forced to write, which ended up being a good thing because I discovered a love of writing, and I discovered that I am a writer in some sense. And it made me clarify, it made me really hone my thinking, where I would always think, oh, I understand this, but then try to write it, that's a different story. Then you find out you just don't really. So when I wrote my first book, it took me a full decade, and just recognizing that I had to get it right. I had to do this in a way that really made sense to me, first of all, and then to other people. So writing has been humbling. It's been difficult, excruciatingly painful at times, but a salvation for me. It's humbling, though, and also in the sense that some people are moved by what you write, and other people just, it's meaningless, couldn't care less. I also should say that having this secular upbringing and then going off to study religion, I think of myself, or I like to think of myself, as a religious person. I don't belong to any religious organizations, but I seek a spiritual kind of relationship to the important things in my life, whether it's music or my backpacking in the mountains or being in the ocean or to philosophy primarily, but also to my meditation practice as somebody practices Zen Buddhism. So it's important for me to cultivate the sense I have of being a religious person in a different measure, right? In a different way, somehow differently. And I always trace this back when I think about it to my study of the origins of religion, where early people, before any of the other elements of culture came into existence, religion was there. And religion is the root of philosophy and art and dance. And so we can picture these people in archaic times, beating to a rhythm and dancing into an ecstasy, and some of the few beginning to stare into the stars and wondering, where did we come from? How did all this work? What are we as human beings? So those questions for me are religious questions, and however far particular religions stray from that baseline, I say, let's go back to it. Let's be religious in a deeply authentic way. So another theme that's important for me that I'll keep bringing up, so I warn you ahead of time, is that mind-body connection that is developed in Nietzsche and that is really important. It sets the stage for the rediscovery of the Olympics in the modern period. But I also find it in Zen Buddhism. Zen is very much a bodily practice. It's something you do with your body that affects your mind. And so I'm interested in that question. If you want to think about how to live, one place to begin that's very important is with your own embodiment, right? Here you are as a physical thing. So let me just make one more point. I feel incredibly lucky to have stumbled into a career as a professor where I could teach, hone my ideas. It's been wonderful. But there's a big difference between a community of like-minded, different aged people who are focused on a question that's as central as how do I live my life. Students come into my classes, as many of you came into your classes or teach them, and they're there for a variety of reasons, and it's not always to answer the question, how should I live? Some of them are, but not everybody. So it's not as always, you have to make it a coherent community focused on those things. You have to develop that. But what I think is important about the Substack is it gives us a chance to create a community that's really honed in there. So I invite your participation. I think this could be a real opportunity for all of us. I'll stop there.
That's great. Okay, a little bit about me. So I've been having this conversation about the relationship between Nietzsche's philosophy and Zen Buddhism and how to live a meaningful life for more than 30 years with Dale. More than 30 years, which is really, I was thinking about that today. In some form or another, on and off a little bit as I went away and came back. And it's something that I've been thinking about in some form, not in a very well-developed form earlier on, since I came to the United States from Iran in 1979, this question of how to live a meaningful life. And for me, it was sort of imposed on me. I left in a revolutionary time where the tradition of Shi'ism that I grew up in, that was culturally what I grew up in, was in some sense ruined for me as, a violent, murderous ideology once, the Islamic Republic took over. And then, so I didn't feel a part of that. And then I came to the United States and here, while I have, I should have felt right at home in many ways because of the politics of the time. I didn't. I felt excluded in important ways. And so what happens that ended up being quite a gift actually, is that it gave me outside perspective, like an ability to step outside and see the limits of different cultures, that they're perspectives. And it allowed me that kind of mobility, intellectual mobility. But it also came with a bit of a crisis, which was, not being immersed in a culture like a fish in water. Like now I had to invent something for myself. So that was a pretty intense thing that I felt at a very young age. Maybe I was 10 or 11 when I started talking to my parents about this. Lucky for them, that must have been fun. And so, yeah, so there's that. And then I started to confront in myself and see in others the way that cultural clashes can lead to resentment, to closure, to a certain kind of hatred. And so that's always been a part of my consciousness. And Nietzsche's, and this is how I got attracted to Nietzsche to start with, was his analysis of resentment as a fundamental problem of human life. And I remember, I misunderstood it, of course, when I was 15 and I got the portable Nietzsche and started reading it. And that often doesn't lead to any good, reading a bunch of Nietzsche at 15. But as insufferable as I surely was, I did understand the problem of resentment and closing yourself off. So those are the two main things that I inherited or stumbled into, were this recognition of the danger of closure, this sense that there's a way in which there's many perspectives, right? There's many ways to do it, and also a need to create a meaningful life. As I got older and I started to work with Dale, I started to talk to Dale about these things. I recognized how close to what I wanted as a way of like settling myself and having good habits and managing my own anxieties and my own fears, and my own tendency towards like existential dread, which is a pretty strong tendency, how important Zen Buddhism would be for that. And I've been thinking those two in relationship in my own amateur way with regard to Zen Buddhism, certainly my whole life. And ever since that time, I went off to grad school, studied continental philosophy, and came back, and I taught with Dale courses on how to live. We taught courses together. What is enlightenment? Religious atheism. Great courses where I tried to get Dale to do exactly, Krzysztof, what you're about to get him to do by putting this together, which is to have this conversation. But I also taught courses on Islam, and this is the last point I'll make. The way I came to think of religion is much closer to the way that Dale talked about it as I got older, which was this way in which these ancient rituals, these structures of living, the ways of forming habits of living, that they get thrown away, or as in a kind of like secular age, we throw them away, or they get taken up in an extraordinarily rigid and unhelpful way. For me, unhelpful way. And I started to think about that a great deal, and returning to religion as sort of a foundation for how to live, but also to think about how much the traditions have shared over the years with each other, how deeply imbricated they are with one another, from China and India to the Middle East, or however we want to do that, North Africa and around the Mediterranean, just how deeply they've shared core ideas, core arguments, how they've debated with each other. So this idea of a comparative discussion between Zen Buddhism and Nietzsche's philosophy, I think there's a way in which in the contemporary age that can strike people as kind of odd or even more problematic. I think they're misguided. I think that there is and has been for at least a couple thousand years, more than that, a dialogue that's been going on in complex ways, a very slow one, but an important one. And I think it's important to think about that. So, Krzysztof, you're up.
All right. Wow. Those are magnificent introductions. Let's see what I could do. I was born in Poland, in a Roman Catholic country, and immigrated to New York City when I was 6, apologies. And By the time I was 18, I thought I had left organized religion behind. Roman Catholicism never really ignited much of a flame in me at any point. So I would say my early 20s, 30s were, religion was not very much anywhere. But while working on my PhD in English at the University of Texas, the work of David Foster Wallace really captured my imagination, and I ended up writing a dissertation titled Buddhist Philosophy in the Work of David Foster Wallace. That was in part inspired by my having met Zen teacher Flint Sparks, who showed me in this embodied way that Dale was talking about what it means to truly inquire about a person's life, what it means to explore someone's core beliefs and assumptions about life and their maps of consciousness that they might not have been conscious of. This was a thing I attended here in Austin, a weekly meeting called Inquiry for many, many, many years. And that's where I think I gained my sense of volition. I wanted to do what I saw Flint doing with others. And over time, I learned what those ingredients were. In part, it was Zen practice, and that helped me establish an authentic, daily, consistent Zen practice for, I guess it's been 13 years now. And on top of that, I learned the two particular therapeutic modalities that he incorporated into this performance of inquiry. And those are called Hakomi therapy and IFS therapy. So I went out and I trained and studied in both. And I'm still developing my skill set. All these things together are what I see as skills needed to really meet people one-on-one. And the place where I've done that most authentically all my life has been in the classroom. Since I started teaching with the Teach for America program right out of college, and then my graduate school days, and I taught at Whitman College, and now I'm in the Department of Rhetoric at the University of Texas, teaching a course inspired in large part by Dale's work and Dale's book, Philosophical Meditations on Zen Buddhism, which I use as a text. So getting this opportunity to work with Dale on this project is really thrilling for me. Otherwise, I think the passion that has inspired me more than any is literature. And I always thought that I could gain some new perspective and unrealized way of living by embodying, by using my imagination, following characters and stories. And that's in part why Nietzsche really appeals to me, his literary style. It's sometimes, I don't know, if I'm reading philosophy or literature. And so I think in this sense, my study of literature and all the ways that people can shape character, their own character, and cultivate it via their imaginations lead me to this true sense of being a philosopher, a lover of wisdom. How can I get my hands on more wisdom? What does it look like? Where does it live? And so I think that's what I try to do. And doing this work in a way that is public seems to me like it'll engage others with all kinds of questions and lived questions that aren't prepackaged. The last thing I want to say in reference to Dale's reminder that there's something embodied about philosophy, or I would guess say potent philosophy, is that I've been a lifelong athlete. And I think that comes to play in this arena. I've been a runner since 13. In my later years, I picked up the practice of jiu-jitsu, and both of those are, I think, specifically aimed at this cultivation of character and asking and answering this question: how can I best live this one short, wild life that I've been given? So it's a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure speaking with you both about this topic. I can't wait to see how these conversations unfold.
Yeah. So I didn't know about the jujitsu, Krzysztof. That's very cool. So that's interesting. So you took that up late. I've opted to not do that. It makes me very nervous, although I'm very intrigued by it. But I also picked up something that I didn't expect late in life for the same reasons you said, which was an aspiring and not very good trail runner, long distance trail runner, aiming at what might be an ultra marathon. Precisely for me, and Dale and I have talked about this as a kind of meditation practice, which is very difficult for me to sit still, as you'll see, I guess, the rocking and the moving as you guys watch, but very hard for me to sit still. But I seem to be able to meditate moving pretty well. And it's been extraordinary in changing how I feel and how I live. And I can tell the difference when I haven't done enough of it. And I know Dale's, we won't talk about, your age, but man, you're still out hiking the mountains. It makes me nervous sometimes when I get that news, but
Yeah.
I know you've been doing that forever.
Right, right. A runner once upon a time, but no longer.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Um, so,
So
so yeah, go ahead.
I was going to inquire, Christoph. I really loved to hear Malek talk about his arrival here from Iran, and how it shaped his being in a strange place, strange there, not belonging there, not belonging here. You came over at an earlier age, but it must have had some serious bearing on your life to be also an immigrant. What, I mean, you were so young, maybe it's not a something that's on the surface at all to be thought, but it must be there.
Yeah, it was not until the invasion of Russia, I'm sorry, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, uh, that I was on a walk, and it's one of those life insights come out of nowhere. I technically, literally pieced together that I was born and raised my first 6 years under communism, where I mean, I have a very under Russian influenced communism, and I was too young to really have any understanding of obviously the politics or the world at large. But I do remember, threadbare stores and lines and that kind of austere upbringing. Uh, when I immigrated to New York City, the first place I went to, literally from the airport, was the Toys R Us in Brooklyn. And that was, I mean, I really remember that day. I was 6 years old, going from
Yeah.
nothing to some fantastical
Paradise.
land of, yeah. I mean, it was and so I mentioned that, I think, because New York City, for a 6 year old who grew up in a communist country, was, yeah, it was an alternate universe. But the thing about New York City, if you've ever been, you know that it's this uh I don't want to use a cliche, but like, what is it? A boiling pot, not a boiling
Melting pot.
pot, a, yeah,
Melting
melt
pot.
thank you, a melting pot of all cultures, of all kinds of people, and that normalized me, I think, pretty quickly. My mom just said, my mom just encouraged me to not put up with bullies. I didn't speak English until didn't pick it up for 3 years, I think. And then in 1988, I went to a Mets game, and I remember people told me all you need to do is yell "strawberry" really loud, and you'll fit right in. And I remember baseball is the best sport ever. I don't understand what they're doing, but it's all about strawberries and Mookies.
That's right.
And so I think the gift, Dale, of being an immigrant ends up being this looser attachment to what you thought was true, into, oh my God, like everything's true all at once.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it has something to do with my wanting to be all over the place, all over the world. I was born into California, and I still live in California. So it's like, home. I was never an outsider. I was always the insider. White guy. I loved athletics, loved girls. It just, everything was the norm for me. So to feel weird, I had to go to Japan. I had to go to China and Vietnam and
Mhm.
Bulgaria and, in Latin America. And those were important experiences for me.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Hey, I also want to acknowledge that David Foster Wallace. I spent a number of years in the David Foster Wallace labyrinth, and there's a lot there. A lot of really useful, interesting things, especially as I think his work matured, Krzysztof. And so in particular, I was really taken with the Pale King,
Mhm.
that like sort of posthumous manuscript and that confrontation with boredom. Um, so I'm really interested in talking about that with you. And obviously, I accidentally referenced the "This Is Water" talk earlier.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but I wanted to ask you something before we call it a day. Why fire philosophy? It's a great title. You came up with it. We all love it. Why call it fire philosophy?
I thought it I thought the greatest difficulty with philosophy is its abstraction. And sometimes as I'm reading the words on the page, I nod along and it makes sense to me and then or not. But then I close the book and I wonder to myself, has anything changed for me? Like what has changed? The and so I think it was in conversation with Dale about this project. He was talking about things that have an impact that can be felt. And I also conceive of Zen as a fierce and radical practice, and the writings of Nietzsche as something fierce and something you feel. When I think of fire, I think of it as an element that gives life. It has danger in it, but also a warmth, and it impacts you. And so I was thinking of philosophy of the kind that could genuinely offer people something pragmatic that can be felt. So fire philosophy. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd always, and Dale can attest this, the fluid and water metaphors in Nietzsche and in Zen, and of course I picked them out. I focus on them, right? So there's lots of other elemental metaphors, but the fluid ones always got me. So I've got this completely outrageous reading of Book Four of the Gay Science, for instance. It's entirely about that, but at the heart of that thing is fire as well. So when you said fire philosophy, it like sort of uh, it hit me in a way that I was like, fire. It's water. Of course, it's water. I got like one of those moments, but I really like this. There might be secretly. Let's see if we can sort it out to run a thread of elemental thinking through our conversations. I
Yeah.
think that they're all, like you in our conversations, you've talked about, hands in the dirt. Uh, Obviously philosophy is airy and abstract, and now we've got water and fire. I think we're off to a pretty good start in that regard.
Fire dances and it jumps. And there's the great line in Nietzsche where he can only worship a god who dances, or or you have to be able to dance on the edge of the precipice. But for me, the first image that came out into my mind when Christoph mentioned fire philosophy, oh, that's great. But the first image was ancient Persia, right? Zoroastrian traditions of not fire worship, but focus into the fire. You can picture them in, really ancient culture where they're nomads and you're out in the desert and you're all huddled around the fire, stars above, the embers below. It's the universe is on fire, and they were right. And that's the depth dimension, not just in ancient Persia, but you study around the world, something deep about fire.
And we're not that far from Iranian New Year and Chahar-Sham Suri, where you jump through fire to start the new year, and
Whoa.
burn off the old and the ill, out with the yellow, in with the red, as Nietzsche references, and then Heidegger gets wrong in his reading of Zarathustra. But yeah, the Zoroastrians are good there. I'll claim them as my people. Who knows if I have any connection?
Yeah.
uh, so probably the
Yeah.
Turkic
Yeah.
tribes. But
Here,
so
here's a
that
related here's a related question for you, Malik. Speaking of fire, it's hard for me to think that you can give an adequate description of who you are without talking about your work with the American Civil Liberties Union, without talking about your work with the Muslim and Persian communities in Los Angeles, where your political work is a major part of your work. So, what's up with that? How does that connect?
It's a difficult question. Mostly it connects in the way it connects for Zarathustra, which is I go up the mountain and down the mountain. It's so for me, I I got into philosophy for learning how to live, so in ethics, like in a strict sense, a way to be a person. Um, but we live with people, and you don't get to just decide how to live on your own. And again, politics is something both that is in my family. I grew up talking about politics. Everyone in my Iranian side of my family, in particular, were deeply involved in national politics. So I just grew up thinking about it and understanding myself in relationship to a broader social set of issues and forces. But also, my whole identity from the ages 10, before that, because the revolution in Iran was starting when I was 7 or 8, you know, politics shaped my life, both in Iran, the revolution, and when I got here, everything that was going on in my life was shaped by how the media presented what was going on, how politicians responded honestly or dishonestly to what was going on, and how that affected the people around me. And so it just felt like, I'll put this, pretty starkly, which is if I was going to live, much less live well, I was going to have to think about how to manage how other people, um, uh, uh, related to me and other people like in a similar situation to me or a worse situation than mine. And so politics was really for me a matter of survival. I've been thinking about this, Dale, more. I usually don't think that much about it. It's just something I do. But I think it was a matter of survival for me. Like it just made sense to me that would have to be done. Um, and I've always thought both politically and ethically at the same time. And I'd say that's mostly what I do. I'm interested in metaphysics, or fundamental questions as political and ethical questions. And but then again, after 9/11, that went from a kind of broad interest in politics to a very specific interest in politics. Now, not so much for my own survival, but for my kids, both of whom are Iranian and have Iranian names, and um, that I was worried about them being a lot worse than it was for me. But then also watching what was happening to Middle Eastern and Muslim people, um, uh, and seeing how the anti-immigration sentiments that were so prevalent and so strong were then intensified and brought over to groups that had tried to blend in. They had not been political. Arabs, Muslims, Iranians had tried to keep as quiet as possible. And they were just not equipped for what was coming. And I just felt a responsibility, like, a totally inappropriate, self-aggrandizing responsibility to do something, So yeah, I ended up, ACLU was doing really good work at that time. I joined up with them. So for me, it's just an extension of my broad sense that in a Nietzschean sense, that we live in when he accounts, like, he says, like, was it 1086 and Will to Power? You know what the world is to me. And he describes that ball of like forces and a plenum that constitute each other. They're that are mutually constituting. That if you're going to do an ethics, you also have to do a politics. You can't have just one without the other.
Yeah. For Aristotle, politics was a discipline of ethics. Ethics was the big picture. How do I live? Okay, this is how I live individually. This is how I live collectively. Politics. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that if there's a, as we know, it's intensifying. We live in that kind of an era. And so, yeah. So the politics is crucial. I used to have this line. I don't know if it's a good line or not, which is, for me, politics is about not dying tonight, and philosophy is about what's possible tomorrow. That's not quite right, but it's not entirely wrong.
Good one.
Wow. Yeah. It's been a pleasure getting to know you guys in this format today. I hate to mix metaphors, but I think life can be intimidating. There's all kinds of changes happening quickly. The fire is raging, but come in. The water is fine. And we hope to create a community where we work through a whole lot of issues that revolve around living life with fire, living it well, living it fiercely, and we can't wait to see what this project turns into.
Okay, but before we go, I wanna make sure we get this line of yours that you wrote to us, in the preparation for getting this whole project going. I'm just gonna read it from your one of your emails. Ours is a get your headband sweaty and your hands and fingernails dirty type of project. We ask for your participation. I refuse to let that one go to waste. So, as a sort of longtime wearer of sweaty headbands and having not gone to a beep baseball, but had spent my day fighting bamboo, my fingernails are plenty dirty. We'll keep them off screen. But yeah, so I hope that we can keep to that idea, of keeping it like grounded and talking about how to live in the world we're actually in. And so I really appreciate you getting this together, Krzysztof, and I'm looking forward to it.
As well as I am. So,
All
thank
right,
you.
gentlemen.
All right, till next time, y'all.
Till next time. Okay.
Next time.
That worked out okay.